Transform your Christian school culture through the Flourishing Journey with Dr. Edward Bunn, ACSI Professional Development Director.
Welcome to the Flourishing Journey podcast. I'm Dr. Edward Bunn, and I will serve as your travel guide throughout this podcast series. We'll explore strategies and principles for building a school culture that truly thrives. Each month, we'll take a brief pit stop centering around a relevant, flourishing construct as together we journey into the world of ideas, research, and practice. Well, hello, flourishing practitioners, and welcome to the first of 3 episodes around the flourishing domain of expertise and resources. An area of this domain that we have to get right is this: organizational culture. Regarding culture, Best Christian Workplaces, which assesses the well-being of a variety of work environments, including schools, notes that work is life-giving when our skills and spiritual gifts are leveraged in a way that gives energy. So with this in mind, we'll jump into our primary topic today with Chris Loncar as we explore the topic of a healthy workplace culture. Chris Loncar is the Vice President of Human Resources at ACSI. He spent the first 10 years of his calling as a pastor before transitioning to the human resource field, a blend that has given him a versatile and thoughtful approach to leading the HR function of an organization. He has a bachelor's degree in human resource management, a senior certified professional through the Society of Human Resource Management. His passion is fostering environments and creating opportunities for employees to thrive in what they are gifted to do by coming alongside to advise, train, encourage, and inspire. Wow, man, it's so exciting to have you with us today, Chris. Welcome to the Flourishing Podcast.
Thanks, Edward. It's really good to be here with you today.
Awesome. Well, I'd love to just kind of jump right into our podcast today. I'm excited about this topic. So, how does a healthy workplace or a healthy workplace culture impact employee productivity and overall organizational success?
Well, it would help to define what culture is first, I think. And I think so many people have different ideas on what it is. And if you type it into Google, it's going to describe a bunch of different things. But in its simplest definition, culture is the beliefs, values, and behaviors shared by a group of people. That's still pretty abstract, though, so I'll take a different approach to defining it that I don't think is in conflict with that. So how about this? It's the beliefs, values, and behaviors that make up a culture set the expectations for all employees on how they are to act. And so this is the sense that we feel as employees or people of an organization, the urging to act in a specific manner based on what the expectations are. And they're set up by the most influential people in the organization. So for example, if the most influential people are setting up a culture of fear, where you can't approach people with ideas, or when you're fearful for your job because your leader is insecure, it changes the behaviors of employees to act in a guarded, more quiet manner. So their mental bandwidth is focused on their fear rather than engaging them with being productive and influential with their own jobs. But the most influential people are not always the leaders. They can be people that leaders allow to dominate the culture of the organization. And many times it's because they're super talented and they don't want to confront those people, or they're super valuable to what it is that's being done, so they have free reign to treat people how they want. But the leaders in an organization are the only ones with the authority to turn around a bad culture. And so the right culture in place for the best behaviors to thrive, well, then productivity is going to skyrocket because they're not distracted from the negative effects of bad cultures. So when leaders and influencers cultivate the good characteristics that want to be cultivated, then you have what you need to make an organization effective, free up that mental bandwidth of employees to really engage with what it is that adds value to the organization. And so you become what you cultivate, and you face, for better or for worse, the consequences and the benefits of what you allow to influence a culture. And that all begins with the expectations that are set.
That's awesome. I love how you talked about and leaned into cultivation, right? So we become what we cultivate. I think individually and corporately as an organization. And then you talked about just kind of cultivating what that means, cultivating good characteristics, pushing those good characteristics into the DNA, the culture, if you will, of our organization so that it does increase and enhance that productivity. There's a joy of working. There's a joy in working. There's a joy in contributing to the value of any organization under those set priorities. So, thanks for that. I love it. So kind of building on question number one, Chris, is, how can leaders actually encourage transparency and open communication in a way that contributes to that positive culture that we just talked about?
Well, transparency goes a long way when it comes to leadership. I think one of the things that leaders many times fail to do is be transparent, and not only be transparent, but be transparent about the right things. Being transparent doesn't mean that everybody says whatever they want to say, and people get away with whatever they want to say. Transparency is one of those things where you strategically are vulnerable with employees about where you're at, where the organization is at, what you want to accomplish. Employees feed off of that. But it should also create an invitation to participate in that transparency. Meaning, what is it that you're trying to accomplish by being transparent to begin with? Let me use an example. When I was a young pastor, I became a pastor in 2008, right when the economy crashed. So hello, here I am in the full-time workforce for the first time, and the economy crashes. What I appreciated about our lead pastor and my boss at the time was that he said, you know what, we're in a pretty bad financial position right here and right now. But I want to invite you into where we are. I'm taking a pay cut. And if you feel like God's going to move on your heart to do that, go ahead and come to us and participate in that so that we can help each other keep our jobs. There was such a level of transparency there that allowed me to feel like I was being a part of something bigger than myself. And so that kind of transparency that invites employees into the story that you're telling, that advances a purpose and highlights the employee's contribution to the culture and to the organization can really go a long way. I'll finish with another key element is acting on the suggestions of employees, and proving to them that you did so. Right? Like employees, if you're going to ask for feedback, if you're going to ask for advice, if you're going to ask for open communication, employees will be able to sense whether you're just doing that because you're just paying lip service to the idea of transparency and communication. If you're genuinely interested in taking feedback, of course, you don't take all of it, but what are the key things that you can make action items to prove to employees that their communication with you matters and it's going somewhere? And so getting those bottom shelf types of things where you can grab a hold of suggestions and say, I'm going to run with this and prove that I value their transparency with me, just as I'm being transparent with them.
Yeah, I like how you mentioned, transparency opens the door for everybody in the organization to be a part of the narratives, or to use your language, to be a part of the grand story of what God is actually doing in our organization and through our organization for His glory. So I remember, one time when I was the head of school, I remember meeting with a group of teachers, and it was that end of the year meeting where they share the positives, the highlights, but they also share some of the roadblocks and maybe some opportunities for some positive change moving forward. And I was walking out with a particular one of our elder statesmen, one of our mature, experienced teachers, and he said, "Dr. Bunn, you know what? We shared a lot with you today." He said, "But I don't care if you do anything that we said. I just cared that you told us what the future is going to look like. with us included in that journey, and you listened to us today. And to me, that's very exemplary of you talking about transparency and open communication. In other words, that willingness to get involved and do something when we say we hear you. Well, can we put some action steps to that? So appreciate that. And then, so kind of our third question here to kind of progress forward, Chris, is, you know, how can employees contribute themselves to a positive workplace culture, even if they're not in a leadership role?
Hmm. Well, I think it's good to define for employees that even if they're not in a leadership role, everyone has a certain level of influence, and that means that they have leadership in some capacity. Leaders set the tone for what type of culture is within an organization, but employees have to participate in it. Employees get to determine whether they're going to be positive contributors to a workplace culture. And so this is very much a both and thing. I would say one of the things is that employees need to determine if the environment that they're in is the best place for them to thrive. I've met a lot of employees over the years that they're just not a match for the culture and they know it, but they're not willing to leave. And it's one of those things where you have to determine if your values align with the values of the organization and recognize that that may change over time based on the season of vision a particular organization may be in, and that's okay. The other thing that I would say is that when it comes to issues with authority figures, go vertical and not horizontal. Go right to that person, if you can and if it's appropriate, and leadership if you have an issue or something like that. And then go horizontal and not vertical when you have a problem with a peer. Sometimes we have we mix up our relationships where it's like, okay, well, instead of going to my peer horizontal first, I'm going to go vertical to my supervisor. And then if you have a problem with your supervisor or an authority figure, you go horizontal to your peer instead of vertical to your authority figure. And that can create some warped sense of culture where gossip can reign, the law of second offense can occur in others, and all of a sudden that culture becomes toxic. Whereas if we engage the right communication channels, we can actually solve things pretty quickly. That doesn't mean that it's always appropriate. Sometimes you need to go to a human resources department or something like that to share some things that you may not feel you could otherwise share with someone else. But for most issues, that principle of knowing when to go horizontal and knowing when to go vertical can really help. And so those are a few things that employees can do to help foster that. You really need to understand that you are a part of contributing positively or negatively to the culture. And you may be one person, but you can have an outsized effect on the experience of other people within the organization.
I like that. Fit, right? As you were talking, I kept thinking about fit, and a lot of our Christian school leaders, they lean into that. Yes, they recognize a gifted teacher or a gifted administrator, and they have experience, and but at the end of the day, it comes down to organizational fit within that mission and that vision and the scope and expanse of all of that organization. And then I hear you. I love one of my mentors a long time ago said, Edward, positive down, negative up. So he said, if you have anything negative to say, that needs to go up towards your direct report because they can handle the roadblocks and the challenges, right? But you don't need to be sharing negative with people that are on that same playing field, if you will, or maybe below you. But if anything's positive, let it spread, let it permeate that level.
Yes.
Well, we only have a couple of minutes left, Chris, but I just want to capture one more quick question, man. This is so good.
Yeah.
Just in closing, what are some simple, maybe everyday practices that can help reinforce a healthy culture within an organization?
Well, you don't know where you're going to go until you know where you are. And so taking some sort of survey, like for example, ACSI uses the Best Christian Workplaces instrument that you mentioned earlier. That really helped us understand we were in the 0 percentile several years ago, all the way to being in the 80s in terms of percentiles over the course of time, because we were able to identify where we were, so we knew what to work on. So something structured can really help you build a culture and reinforce a culture and see how you're growing in certain areas. Another thing that I would say to leaders is identify what are some of the bottom shelf things that are easily implementable within the organization that can generate wins and momentum. So what are the problems that you've identified within the organization that may be relatively easy to solve? Generate a quick win, build that momentum, tackle it so that people can see that change is happening and movement is happening. Sometimes we're so overwhelmed by the gravity of what needs changed or reinforced that we just kind of walk away because we're so overwhelmed by the sheer size of it. But change begins one step at a time. So build the early momentum. Another thing I would say is be protective of who comes into the organization. You have to recognize that your culture is an ecosystem. So if you have an incredible team and you're recruiting and you're bringing in people, don't let desperation drive you to make decisions on people that have character issues or who may not be a fit within the organization, because then you may poison your own culture by prioritizing talent over culture and character and all those things. Sometimes it's the right person in the wrong place. Like, for example, palm trees don't grow in Ohio, where I'm from. Lived there for a few decades. I know that for a fact. Can't grow a palm tree in Ohio. But there's also times where it's the wrong person in the wrong place in any circumstance. So I live in Colorado now, and invasive insects in the mountains eating the pines and causing fire risks and things like that. That's something that we're really big as a state on preventing, right? And so you have to ask God for that discernment, to be able to discern who's coming into the organization and what they could actually bring. And then on the employee level, be willing to be a part of solutions and put skin in the game. It's easy to complain, and it runs with human nature to do so. But good leaders are going to respond to a complaint of an employee and say, this is great. This is what I think we need to do. Now, what's your role in helping this become a better thing for our organization? And if people just want to complain, they're going to be like, oh, I wasn't planning on doing anything about it. I just wanted to get it off my chest. But when as an employee, you complain from a perspective of genuine concern and being willing to be a part of the solution and bringing forth suggestions to the table and countering your own human nature, which can be to gossip and to tear down and all those things that our sin nature brings to our lives, it causes us to become a part of that solution and reinforce the culture and build that within the organization. And so I would just encourage on the employee level, see the glass not as half full, half empty, but half full, and that you have a role in getting that cup to overflowing, and let the blessing and the touch of God allow the organization to get to that point with your role helping to lead the way. So there's just a few things that I would share. We could go on and on and on about that subject. But to use the term bottom shelf, these are the bottom shelf reachable things that I think people can start today.
Yeah, this is great. This is wonderful advice, just some everyday practices from, data tells the story, right? So using tools and assessments to allow that data to turn into some improvements, leaning into the fit that we talked about, not making hiring process urgent by any means, but sitting, waiting, praying, and being intelligent about that process. And I love how you lean into just employees being a part of the solution. You were identifying, people have different levels of influence, but there's leadership with that influence. And so just, hey, how can I be a part of the solution? I think if we all had that attitude, every organization would be much greater, much stronger. So thanks for sharing those. Well, I mean, it's been a joy to have you. Thank you so much, Chris, for journeying with us today around the flourishing construct of resource planning, sharing some ideas, some research, and some strategy. So thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Edward. I appreciate the time.
Yeah, it's been a joy. Well, join us next time on the Flourishing Journey podcast as we continue this series on healthy workplace culture.
The Flourishing Journey is a presentation of the Association of Christian Schools International. Foster a flourishing school culture by visiting acsi.org/flourishing.